Now, in this next section, we're going to look at the process for getting the AWS Command Line Interface, or CLI. So the first thing that you would need to do is you need to go to the documentation and read for your particular operating system, and I'm on a Mac here, how you would download, what are the prerequisites, so on and so forth. Tip from the real world, although for the Mac version, the instructions here say to use the pip package installer. I've actually had better luck with Homebrew. So if you just search on Homebrew and you use that process for installing Python and the other prerequisites, I've had better success with that. Just a tip. So you download and set this up per these instructions. And I've already done this on this computer. If you're using pip, you run pip install upgrade user AWS CLI. Of course, the process is going to be different on Linux or Windows. And then once you're done, you want to do some verification. So I'm going to switch over to the terminal and I'll do some verification. So the first way that you want to verify that the CLI has been set up correctly is you just want to type AWS space -- version. Another tip I'll give you is when you're working with new services like the AWS code tools, you want to make sure that your version of the CLI is a minimum or higher version because, of course, these are new services. So you can see the version is returned here. I'm on 1.11.84. And again, your version might be different, depends on when you watch this. Now, if you've never set up the CLI before, you're going to have to use the AWS space configure command. I've already done this, but I'll show you what it looks like. So what this does is this associates your session with a IAM user account key, both a regular key and also a secret access key, so that you have credentials, because this is a client accessing Amazon. So you would have to either use, an administrator account, hopefully you would not be using a root account, or a lesser permissioned account that you have set up, and you'd have to have these keys. And then you set a default region name and output format. The default is JSON. You can change it to text if you want. So you only have to do this one time. And if it is set up, then you'll get these masked key values. If it's not set up, you'll have to paste the keys on in. Then the way I always like to do kind of like a hello AWS CLI, just to make sure that the tool is working, is I like to list my S3 buckets. And again, just to give you a visual on this, if I go over at S3, you can see that for CodeStar, we've got 3 buckets. Now, your screen might differ here. I have, from a different demo that I did, I have an Elastic Beanstalk bucket. You could have additional buckets. You might have different names, but these are the names of the buckets. So this is what we expect to be returned if the CLI is set up correctly and we have the right permissions. So I'm going to type in AWS space S3 LS, and I'm going to expect those 4 bucket names. And those are good to go. So that's the basic setup of the CLI. So now as it relates to automation around code pipelines, what we're going to do is we're going to use some of the new APIs that Amazon has added to the CLI for CodeStar. So inside of CodeStar, of course, we created the demo serverless project. And it's always good just to sort of start at the top level to make sure that the API is working, you have the right permissions. It's a best practice with the CLI. So I've actually created a little script that you can use, and I'll just open it up. I'm using just a code editor here. So we have run line 2 already to verify the CLI itself is working. And then I just ran AWS configure to verify that I had keys. And then I ran line 8 just to make sure that I could connect to S3. So now we're getting into the CI/CD specific aspects of this. So for CodeStar, we want to start kind of a hello CodeStar by describing our project resources. So the syntax is AWS CodeStar describe -project with the ID value, and then you have to put in your project name. Of course, your project name might be different here. So I'm just going to copy this, and then I'm going to paste this in. And you can see that this gives us some metadata about our project. So we have a stack ID, we have an ARN, we have a project template ID, we have our description, the created timestamp, a request token, the ID, the ARN, and the name. So we are successfully able to interoperate with CodeStar. Now, what can we do with CodeStar from a programmatic access standpoint? Well, over in CodeStar, one of the capabilities is you can add team members. So you can see I don't have any team members. It's just the person who created it, which is me, this account right here. So what I want to do is I want to add a new developer, and I want to do that programmatically. So in order to do that, what I've done is I've created an IAM account for a developer by clicking in IAM under Users, Add User. So I've got this developer, and in addition to giving, this is probably more permission than you'd probably want to give to an actual developer, but I gave the developer some permission. Under the security credentials section, in addition to the regular access key, you may remember from an earlier video that a best practice and Amazon recommended practice for your developers for CodeStar is to either set up SSH keys, which you've created locally, and upload them and associate that to the user account, or to use HTTPS GET credentials. So I've used that in this case to make this developer able to interact with CodeStar. And then I'm going to need to have the ARN of this user account. So again, if you're following along, your account number is going to be different. Your name might be different here, but it's basically you want this value to be passed into the code. So first, we're just going to validate using the code on line 14 that we don't have any team members, which we saw in the console, but we're just going to show you the coding pattern here. So if I paste this in, the pattern is AWS CodeStar list team members for the project ID demo serverless. And we don't have any. So now we want to add a team member to our project. So the pattern is CodeStar associate team member for the project ID, which again, yours might differ, with the user ARN, yours might differ, and then the project role. The roles are either viewer, contributor, or owner. And just a tip again from the real world, you don't want to have these spaces in, so I just put this so you could see it. But you really want to just run it this way, or you can have a problem in the terminal. So let me just copy this whole thing, paste it into the terminal. And you don't get any message if it works. Of course, you could programmatically just list the team members. And you can see that now I have a new team member who's a contributor. You do have an option to allow remote access or not. And there's the ARN. And then, of course, when you're just getting started, it's always a good practice to verify on the console. So here, if I refresh, I can see now I have a developer who's a contributor. And that's the basic pattern for working with really any service on Amazon in terms of automation for the CLI. But I just thought it would be fun to work with the new CodeStar service as a demonstration.